So we will begin by generating an altruistic intention, motivation, with the understanding that we have come together to familiarize our minds with the stages of the path to enlightenment, the essence of the Buddha's sutra teachings, that we generate those minds, confidence in the wisdom and the power of the teachings and in their presentation, in this easily understandable format that was given to us by the great kindness of Lama Tsongkhapa, following on the works of Lama Atisha, this unbroken lineage of wisdom that we inherit. Recognizing the authors of this lineage as completely reliable, unmistaken guides. And understanding that the purpose of following in the footsteps of the Buddha by engaging in the stages of the path is to unlock our capacity to be of perfect benefit. Recognizing that it isn't sufficient to achieve one's own liberation. Countless kind mother sentient beings are trapped within cyclic existence and require our help. We think that we're engaging in this on behalf of those suffering sentient beings. We adopt these minds of refuge and confidence or faith and bodhicitta. All right. So are there any questions about last class that have come up to clarify before we move on? So we'll begin then with day 275, where our old friends craving and grasping are making yet another appearance. So craving, so it says, the quotation, craving and grasping operate every day in a million ways, small and large. And then the first sentence of the discussion, it says, contact and feeling generate craving, which in the 12 links, the wheel of life, is symbolized by a man drinking wine. Just as the man's thirst is never satisfied, so the person deluded by greed is never satisfied and craves more things. So when we talked before about craving and grasping, the word in English that we said that craving is transliterated into is the word thirst, like it is here and like it is in the wheel of life. tana or thirst is craving. And craving is kind of a more, again, just to sort of recap how we discussed it previously, craving is sort of a generalized uh, dissatisfaction with the present moment, with whatever is arising. And I always like the cartoon that I shared maybe once or twice before, where there's a person saying, "Today, I will, abide within the present moment, unless the present moment is unpleasant, in which case I will have a cookie." And so that's kind of, this idea that we we're not satisfied by the present moment, that we're always looking for something to improve whatever it is that's happening, that's sort of the fundamental drive. And so craving is just this generalized, and it may be in relation to an object that's part of our present experience, or something that we might settle on a particular object, or it could just be what is arising in the mind that sets us down the path of looking for a, an object, looking for something like, oh, I don't know, like, like with food, could be just like today was rough, today was, there was a lot of things that I didn't particularly enjoy. So I know based on past experience that if I can sort of trigger some dopamine in my brain, that's gonna, create some pleasant experiences. And so then we go and we're like, well, okay, is it going to be Chinese? Is it going to be Thai? Is it going to be Mexican? What? And then so that sort of initial craving for, I'm not so content with what's happening in the mind and the body, so I'm going to go down a particular chain of thinking. And then so we'll start looking, and we'll start, and then we'll decide. And then once we say, okay, this is specifically what I'm in the mood for, then we start really visualizing and thinking of how that in particular is going to taste, what that's going to be like. And so craving then is going to generate grasping. It's going to generate this idea that I have to be in possession of this specific object. And of course, it also works with aversion. We might, feel like I can't, so it could be that we just want to separate ourselves. We just want to get away from something. And then once we settle on a particular way of getting away from something, of making something stop, and that could be yelling at someone, making them kind of leave our environment by acting aggressively. There's all kinds of ways where we feel that this is intolerable, and then we engage, and then we feel like in order for me to be happy, I must be in possession of um, the opposite of this. I must be free of this, and if I'm not going to be free of this, then I will suffer, and so I must make this come to an end. So it works both with objects of attachment and also objects of aversion. And one, so it works as it says, it operates in a million different ways, some big and small. So sometimes the object of aversion is there, and we want to replace the object of aversion with an object of attachment. Sometimes just an object of attachment is there, and we feel like I must remain in contact with this object of attachment. Sometimes the object of aversion is there and we're satisfied if we just make it stop. Like if if we if we just sort of feel like this person is bothering me, and that's kind of the only thing that's happening that's problematic, is I kind of, I don't really need a cake or, food. I just kind of want to be left alone, and people have just been bothering me, and so I just want to make this person go away. Then that's, we're not really, I mean, we're in that sense, we're attached. The object of attachment in that sense would be that feeling of peace, that feeling of things are, I'm in control of this time, and I want to get back to that feeling of just sort of being able to think about what I want to think about, or get back to the book that I want to read. So we kind of bounce between objects of attachment, objects of aversion, and um, needing to go from one to the other. So then, and I mentioned when craving came up before, I mentioned that it had different baskets, and that, but we didn't go into, we didn't elaborate on that in here. Lama Zopa is elaborating. Yes, Felice, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. In regards to your specific example, I'm thinking of what would be a skillful way to handle it. Let's say I'm an introvert. One of my friends can be on the phone for like an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, at which point I'm, like no longer present with the conversation. What's a skillful way to handle it that isn't, either attachment, running to something, or aversion, like I have to get away from this person? Thank you.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think one way would be to set an expectation kind of right from the beginning, like right when you answer the phone call, you say, "Oh, I'm so happy to talk to you. This is great that you called. Thank you so much. In half an hour from now, I'm just letting you know that I'll have to go, because I need to, I've got other things that are happening. So let's spend this half an hour and catch up. And I'm really excited to hear about, what's going on. But then, like I say, this is the time that I have right now. And then when that half an hour is up, you say, okay, great, thank you so much. As I mentioned, I've got to run because this other thing is coming up for me, and so and you're not being dishonest, you're because you do have, you're gonna go do some activity that's recharging you, and that is helpful for your it doesn't, like, I'm not suggesting that you lie and you say, well, I have a business meeting in half an hour, and there really isn't a business meeting. But you just say, I have half an hour that we can spend together, and then there's just other things that are happening, and and that could be a good way also to like get you to meditate, or because if they're like, well, what is it, what do you have to do, then you say, well, I've scheduled time to meditate, or I've scheduled time to study, and that is something that you could actually then do, and if they don't say anything, then of course you don't have to like give a reason, but then you're like, oh, then you'll go do a little bit of like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of like a breathing meditation, or something constructive, something beneficial, or maybe you like to journal, or you like to read something, or and you just say, well, this is the time that I've set aside, and so, and then they have an expectation, and then it's not like you're interrupting them and they feel like because you were very clear from the beginning. And of course it depends on, if you know that person very well, also, you can, for some people you don't know them as well, and maybe it's not comfortable to say, that this is also just, that I really love talking to you, but I also, it runs out my battery, when it goes on and on. So that's appropriate under certain circumstances. And if you're really close to the person, you can kind of just be upfront and, kind of explain that that's what's happening. But yeah, something like that. And then like you say, you say, I really want to be present. I really want to, but it's just that has to be within a particular, we have to, bound that time. So depends on what feels comfortable.
Those are really helpful suggestions. Thank you.
Any other? Okay. So this idea of craving, in the historical literature, they talk about it coming up in three different ways: craving for sense pleasure, craving for freedom from fear, and craving for existence. So Lama Zopa in the commentary goes into these three baskets. So of course, and craving for sense pleasure is the one that we did use previously, as kind of the main one that's coming up, and of course, um, that's all very clear, since sense pleasure is, of course, there's the five physical senses, and then there's the mental sense consciousness. So anything that is agreeable to any of the six senses, um, is where that would come up. So it doesn't always mean literally tasting, touching. It could mean feeling respected, or feeling appreciated, the things that please the mental sense also, or having a sense of, sometimes it could be feeling in control of a situation. So there are things that please the five physical senses, and then there are also things that please, and certainly it's true that the mental sense is involved when things are perceived as pleasing the five physical senses. That's also true. It isn't, we learn through the mental sense power what kinds of tastes and touches and things, that we do find pleasing, and what we don't find pleasing. So the mental sense power is involved with that very much, of course, but the mental sense power can also be involved separate from any of the physical sense powers, like I say, with respect, with in terms of feelings of appreciation, validation, etc. Those are really occurring only in the mental sense consciousness. So it can kind of work in either way. And then the second one, craving for freedom from fear. The example is such as the strong fear that animals and many poor and oppressed people face every day, the fear of hunger, thirst, death, torture, and so forth. It also includes the wish to be free from the fear of meeting unpleasant objects and not getting our way, which is experienced by more fortunate people such as us. So, yeah, so the first one, pleasurable, senses, pleasurable experiences. This is, the second one is more of threats. Some of those threats can be threats to our continued existence, or they can just be perceived threats, like stress, or anxiety, that sort of thing. But we either are actively chasing things that are pleasurable, or we're motivated to avoid things that seem like a threat. And then craving for existence, it says, is the strongest and most fundamental craving. So the question came up before, with regard to craving and grasping, like, does it count that we just want to continue to exist? And that's directly what is, being presented here. And this is, as it says, really what comes up for all ordinary people at the time of death is the most the strongest way in which this is coming up, where there's a sense, as the mind is becoming more and more subtle, and the way in which we've been able to interact in the world through our senses is being removed from what we can do. That's a very unsettling experience. You could say it's a very dramatic change. We've always been able to see when we wanted to see, hear when we wanted to hear, perceive the world, get information, at will. And that is, as the mind is withdrawing from the body, that begins to go away in deeper and deeper ways, and eventually even the clarity of conceptuality diminishes. The conceptual minds dissolve, and so that's, if the mind is untrained, then there's a real forceful sort of desire, just like when you can't breathe and you very forcefully fight against that. It's similar, in that way. And then that is what it will water the seeds, the karmic seeds that will impel that next ordinary rebirth. So enlightened beings and highly realized beings are free from that kind of reflexive, almost panic in a way. But so that, the goal is to try to make some progress toward gaining at least some control over that. But that very strong, as it says, it's the strongest and most fundamental craving. So, we shouldn't expect, it's difficult to say that we should expect to accomplish that in this life, but sorry. Day 276. When craving grows so strong that we actually decide to possess the object, it becomes grasping. So that's kind of what we've just said, is that grasping is just a further developing or further experiencing of that sort of generalized thirst that we had that kind of spark in the beginning of I would like to move in the direction of this pleasant thing or this unpleasant thing, and then at some point we will really grasp at that. It says grasping is created by craving and causes us to perform non-virtuous actions in an attempt to satisfy our greed, hatred, and ignorance, bringing much suffering. So at some point, when craving is there in the mind, it, by indulging in the craving, by energizing the craving, that impulse will get to the point where we actually are motivated to engage in a specific action in relation to a specific object. And then that object becomes an object of grasping. We've settled on, okay, I, in one way, like we had the option perhaps of sort of, to one degree or another, kind of watching the craving arise in the mind and just kind of noticing it and allowing it to sort of pass on its own. That's, that can be an option that we could try, at least as a training with regard to some things, if that, as much as we can. But if we don't kind of do that, and then that craving is just something that we follow and we energize and we add to that particular storyline in the mind, then at some point we will actually pull the trigger on, it's like we've all had those experiences, like, well, should I order the ice cream? Should I not order the ice cream? Like, and we go back and forth, and then we lose that battle, and then we order the ice cream, and then, then we've committed to that object of grasping, because we feel like that's the most effective way of turning things around, of like improving what's happening. And the Buddha's observation is that that's, from a particular point of view, that's just not accurate. That there are more effective ways of doing that. They're just not what we're familiar with. We haven't really created familiarities with the kinds of inner states of mind that are more effective, that are available, but they weren't available to us when we were children. They weren't available to us when we were, and so over a pretty long period of time, the easiest things that were available to us were just the things that made us more comfortable in. And parents and things, they kind of give, they give candy, and they give, and in order to make tantrums stop and things, they don't necessarily always pick, they're stressed, and they're, it's in public, and they're, and so they sometimes they'll give in. So we've learned, we've created tendencies and habits and familiarities over, of course, not just this life, but beginningless past lives, because all of those ways are the easiest ways of kind of triggering pleasant feelings. And that's, so we kind of don't really question it. We don't think, is there something even more effective? Is there something more lasting, more permanent, better at accomplishing this? Because it's so easy to just get that dopamine hit, either from food or from, getting our way, whatever it is, from things, from changing the external situation, if we can, into something that is more in line with what we enjoy. The commentary says, having tasted one fruit, the monkey clambering for fruit or picking fruit is the object in the wheel of life, clambers over the tree looking for more and more. So it's like, well, yeah, over the course of beginningless past lives, we've indulged in these easy solutions, what seem like solutions. They don't really solve anything, but they trigger temporary pleasant feelings. And, we don't have a lot of encouragement in our culture, to present that anything else is possible, that we kind of have internalized the cultural view that that's as good as it gets, is just a maintaining sort of pleasantness, is all that's open to us. And the Buddha says, well, that's false. That's something that you can do, but it's also possible to do things that are more effective. And so grasping arises when we settle on that particular kind of easily accessible object, and we think, well, at least I'll be able to eat something, or at least I'll be able to, do something. Yes, Cameron.
Venerable, as a lay person, um, not going out with a begging bowl and taking whatever is given to me, um, I'm trying to rectify in my mind the if I'm in town, which is not that often, but if I'm in town, it's a hot day, and there's the ice cream shop, um, and I'm not thinking that this is going to make me, this is going to be the be all and end all and make me happy for the rest of my life. But boy, I'd really like an ice cream. Or if I go to a restaurant, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to look at the menu and I'm going to order what would be most satisfying to me at that point. So, where does craving come into that, or attachment come into that, when we have to make choices every day? And if I have the choice between something that is going to taste good and be satisfying to me and my body, or boy, I could choose this and that'll prove that I'm not craving. Where's the balance?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's ultimately, it's of course, it's meant to be something that arises naturally. It's meant to be, something that we cultivate over time. Not that, we're necessarily white knuckling it or thinking about it in moralistic terms, but that it arises over time, from introspective awareness and through meditation and so on. And in it, I don't think that um you know it seems like one of the most helpful drivers of that is um progress in meditative stability, and ultimately trying to, because um but even with that, in a way, you're kind of just using the most wholesome kind of object, because it's still a very, you're still, it's still very pleasant, but you become disinterested in the coarser things, but in a way, you're kind of just refining the process, um, up until we really um, make progress with all of these, actual Lamrim realizations, because until we really have renunciation, as a meditative realization, certainly, craving and grasping is going to, it runs the show for all of us. It doesn't make us a bad person. It doesn't make us abnormal. It just, we are in the desire realm, and so it is what is kind of our baseline. um so in general, I would say one of the most effective strategies is to think about um turning as much as we can into an offering. Um, and so, and we can bring that, we can integrate that in really deep ways, in our lives. Like, okay, it's true that I have preferences. I don't, there's foods I like, foods I don't like. And so, can I at least think about that as an offering to my gurus, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, even when we're shopping, think, and then really transforming it. Because if we think about it in that context, we make it a really wholesome activity, because it's as if you are preparing that for the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, for your teacher. It's as if you literally would be making that meal, like you were going to go over to that, to the Dalai Lama's house, to your guru's house. And if you were to do that, of course, you would want to get the best ingredients. Of course, you would want to make it as tasty as you possibly could, um, because you're making it as a a gift, as an offering. So as much as we can, if we can have that kind of attitude, then, as Venerable Urbina says, the more we engage in those objects, the more merit, we receive from it. So I think that's a very skillful way, that's presented. And then, I think, as I said, ultimately, it's something that flows from understanding, eventually with time and so on. We understand that the energy of attachment is something, although it is our baseline, it is kind of running the show, it is also creating problems, for us, even if it seems kind of innocuous, or it seems like, well, I'm not stealing, I'm not actually engaging in, not hurting other people, but it's a very, very deep and very, very subtle. And it is reinforcing kind of the dualistic view. It's kind of reinforcing that I need to bring things into my experience, in order to improve, because if a person, Buddhism asserts that it's possible to always be completely contented with the present moment. And so it's possible to only eat really simple. Of course, it's not possible to not eat, but it is possible to only eat simple food. And there's a freedom, I think, in that's what's being asserted. Of course, no one's saying that it's easy or that that's going to arise quickly. And we may only make a certain amount of progress, toward that. But that progress, those karmic seeds, those imprints are now part of the mind, and that's beneficial in terms of our overall spiritual growth. So I think, by contemplating again and again the disadvantages of the energy of attachment, and seeing how we are, how the mind is agitated by that, how when that thought arises, because, of course, nothing that you're describing is, again, it's not abnormal, it's not unusual, it's not uncommon, it's not bad, it's not, but imagine the freedom, imagine the freedom that's asserted, by the understanding that a person could be absorbed in an internal mental state that would be so much better than that it would never occur to them to do any of that. Like, why? It would be weird, because they'd be like, well, I already possess an internal absorption that is beyond any kind of, pleasant feeling that could be generated through interacting with any object. So that's just something that Buddhism is asserting a person can do. And it seems like, that seems amazing to me, like that kind of freedom that possesses. So I think, in a way, it's kind of like being in, like, just taking that as a hypothesis, like that sounds pretty cool. And is that my experience? To what degree is that not my experience? And then again, it's not like being artificial about it, or thinking, well, I just have to pretend, I have to deprive myself. Like I said, this skillful means of offering, I think, Because you're kind of also taking yourself out of the equation in a way with that, when you imagine that the enjoyment that's being experienced is the enjoyment of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and so on. And, kind of like in the same way you delight, like if you were to actually make a meal for someone else, you're not going to eat it, right? So you're not part of the equation. When you're shopping, when you're making it, you're only thinking about the enjoyment that they're going to receive from your gift to them. And then you delight in actually observing that their enjoyment of it. So if we can make things kind of feel like that, then I think over time we've taken ourselves out of the equation so often that that kind of becomes a new habit too. Um, yeah, I think that's all. I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, I don't know that it's explained. There are again four, just like there were different kinds of craving, there are different kinds of grasping that are listed. Again, grasping at sense pleasure, grasping at the wrong view of denying what exists. So this would be like denying the law of cause and effect, denying, you know, the ultimate nature, the empty nature of things, you know, grasping at the wrong view of holding our own beliefs as superior. So this could be holding to, a different philosophy, thinking that, people have to agree with my philosophical system, and then grasping at the wrong view of the sense of a self-existent I. So this is, being unwilling or uninterested in analyzing the I, how the ego exists, and just refusing to, either by clinging to a different philosophical system or what have you. And then it says these four types of grasping relate closely to the extreme views cited by Buddhist philosophers, but I don't think he really gives a commentary on those four. Yep. So then he just goes on to say that the impulse of craving is what makes us determined to do something about the craving, and then grasping arising. Yes, David.
Hi, Venerable. I was just going to ask, what text are you reading? Is this like a public? Is this text open to the public?
Yeah, so the course is based on Lamrim Year, Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe's Lamrim Year. So I think there's a link on the event page. It's available on Amazon for like $1. And yeah, Lamrim Year.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I've studied like the 3-volume Lamrim that you've talked about before in a previous video too, and that obviously it could be kind of dense without a teacher. So it's nice to have these texts that kind of like point things out and kind of explain things, I think, in a more simple manner, I suppose.
Yeah, it's the premise of Lamrim Year is that there are 365 individual contemplations on the Lamrim. So the idea is that a person could, for example, meditate, take each one and use that as their daily meditation, for example, would be one way of working with Lamrim year, and then you would cycle through the whole Lamrim in a year, because it tracks, Lamrim year tracks all of the topics that are in the Lamrim Chenmo.
I see. Thank you.
But of course, the Lamrim Chenmo is, going to give more. It's going to go into more detail. So yeah. All right. So we'll have time. Any other thoughts or questions? So we can move on to day 277. The quotation, craving and grasping cause the karmic potential to actualize in the link of becoming. And then in the commentary, it says grasping at the body generates the 10th link, becoming, which is symbolized by a pregnant woman. So rebirth. The definition of becoming is a deluded secondary mind that is in the nature of the ripening aspect caused by ignorance arising through the power of karma and through the links of craving and grasping. And then it says, quote, in the nature of the ripening aspect means that the karma is no longer a seed or potential, and that the result is being actualized due to these factors. So, of course, we know that whenever we engage in an intentional act, we lay a karmic seed or a karmic potential in the mind at that time through the doing of that intentional act. Could be virtuous, could be non-virtuous, but we created an imprint, a karmic seed. Imprint and karmic seed are actually two different things. So here we'll just say karmic seed, karmic potential in the mind. And that karmic potential is going to remain in the mind until it is either purified or it is experienced. So here, this is talking about, so this is the link of becoming. So we are assuming, with respect to the 12 links of dependent origination, that at the time of death, craving and grasping have again watered or provided the fertile ground or soil for the activation, the actual ripening result of a previously laid down karmic potential, karmic seed. And then this rebirth is now actually being impelled, is actually coming into fruition. And so we no longer talk about it as a karmic seed, but now the result is, so it is, in this example, it would of course be a complete karmic action with all of the factors, because we're talking about becoming, we're talking about actually an entire rebirth being impelled at the time of death and moving into at the time of death through the intermediate state into the first moment of the next rebirth. So it says, acting as a set of 3 links, craving, grasping, and becoming arise just before the result. We may have to wait eons before a particular set of links arises at death, because there is much stronger karma blocking its emergence. It says, for example, a dying human being will naturally crave another human existence, but the causes and conditions for a human rebirth are very rare, and it is more likely that they will fall into the lower realms for many eons. The karma to be reborn as a human being is still there, but the set of craving, grasping, and becoming that brings another human rebirth can only be actualized after all their negative karma has been purified. It says, with becoming from the very moment of the consciousness joining with the sperm and egg of the next life's parents, that consciousness is under the control of delusion and karma. During this life, at death, and in the intermediate state, we are controlled by delusion and karma. So, of course, we enter into our next rebirth with this still the case. It says this is why we have suffered in samsara and why we will continue to suffer in samsara until we can break the continuum of delusion. So of course, if we go back to the teaching on precious human rebirth and, in the foundation of all good qualities, Lama Tsongkhapa says, this rebirth, it has those two, in a way, sort of contradictory ideas, where it says is found only once, and then it says is difficult to find again. So of course they can't literally both be true, where perfect human rebirth is found only once and can then only be difficult to find again. But it kind of means that to expect these causes and conditions to arise spontaneously happens so rarely that it is as if it's only found once. It's so incredibly rare that all of those karmic causes and conditions would assemble simultaneously, say from the lower realms, or even from just kind of an ordinary human rebirth where that person didn't assemble any causes and conditions. But if a person is in possession of a perfect human rebirth and they make good use of it, then they get to move into the category of is difficult to find again. So we never get to move into a category of is super easy to assemble the cause. Unfortunately, it's presented as a challenge to assemble the causes and conditions for a perfect human rebirth. But it is true that if we possess one and we make really good use of it, then we can assemble the causes and the conditions for even a succession of good future rebirths. But of course, purification is quite an important aspect of that process, as is avoiding non-virtue, engaging in virtue, trying to make progress in understanding emptiness. There's all kinds of factors. Okay. So then this becoming just moves. Then this is a continuous sort of cycle, and we're just moving from one to another. So becoming generates rebirth. So first we had the pregnant woman, and then we have the actual birth. So you could say that the first moment, is occurring. The first moment of becoming is this watering of the seed that is occurring during the time of death, and then the first moment of the actual joining of body and mind is when we have rebirth. So becoming sets everything in motion. Becoming, the karma has been ripened, that karmic seed. We can no longer change what's happening. We can no longer, alter the karmic seed that has ripened and is generating the rebirth. It's just that there's two moments in that process. The first moment is that karmic seed being activated, being ripened, and then you have the actual coming together of body and mind For example, for us in the womb. So here, the pregnant woman is now giving birth, but actually, the definition of rebirth isn't the physical moment of human labor. It is the union of body and mind, which for a human occurs in the womb. But I probably shouldn't have started that because we're kind of out of time. So yeah, so probably we'll leave it there. I don't know. Maybe there's not more to say. Well, yeah, I think there's more to say about that. That's a little preview of what is to come. The rebirth, where craving and grasping have activated a karmic seed at the time of death, and that has impelled a rebirth, and then that particular incarnation begins with the link of rebirth. Any thoughts or questions that are not about rebirth? Or okay, so we'll leave it there for today. And so we'll end with dedication. So again, bring to mind the motivation that you established at the beginning, and recognize that by having listened and participated in this way, you've actualized that motivation, which has created positive energy in the mind, and that positive energy will ripen in a beneficial way in the future, and you want to seal that positive energy in a spiritually meaningful way. So think of the ways in which you offer your practice in a spiritually supportive and beneficial way for yourself and others. All right. So today is Thursday. Yeah. So we'll meet again on Monday.